If a mirror is a window into another world, it's no surprise that the Mirrored Soul Sorcerers emerged in Morier. In the middle of the Lakian Wastes is the Great Mirror, a section of sand superheated by something in the past to create a plateau of crystalline brilliance. Wasters living near it believe it to be haunted, but that's not technically true. The other side of the mirror is home to a parallel reality, hollowed by some strange force. When a soul escapes, it tethers itself to a new body, more often than not sending the body's original occupant to the hollow dimension from which it sprung. The hollow nature of their home plane mirrored the hollowness of their soul. Perhaps the emptiness is what allowed them to absorb and store so much magic. There's maybe nothing more satisfying in Dungeons & Dragons than hearing your DM describe some horrifying spell they're conjuring against the party, looking them dead in the eyes and saying, "No." Counterspell isn't a spell, it's a lifestyle, and I wanted to take it a step further. Inspired by Kirby or a rogue from the X-Men, the Mirrored Soul Sorcerer doesn't just shut down spells, it eats them. Early Patreon plug, it's up there. That's where the text version of all of these subclasses are. I've seen a couple people who say that they liked going to the Patreon, opening up the text version, and reading along as they watch the video. So maybe that's something you want to do? It's there. It's one of those. I never know which side it's on. Sorcerers cast spells. That's it. Easy section. I guess you can also use meta magic to augment your spells and make them a little bit different, and that uses sorcery points, which you can also just use to recover spell slots to cast more spells. It's wizard with a way smaller spell list and a much better ability modifier. You cast spells.
What, like it's hard?
Things change up a little bit with these subclasses, obviously. Wild magic sorcerers can explode. Draconic bloodline sorcerers pretend they don't have a d6 hit die. And holy soulies can heal and shoot lasers thanks to having cleric spells. There are also other sorcerer subclasses that have exclusive spells. So why shouldn't the Mirrored Soul get extra spells? Souls from the hollow dimension have an uncanny knack for self-preservation. Even the ones who came into our world before they could speak understood that death on our plane meant a return to the empty one. The spells they learned reflected this, like Shield, which adds 5 to their AC as a reaction. This would often take the appearance of extra hard crystalline skin or a glint of light reflecting off of the caster. The spell mirror image created 3 hollow duplicates that the enemies could accidentally hit instead of the sorcerer, putting them in a fun house that's only fun for the person who cast mirror image. Counterspell is necessary for the Mirrored Soul, so they got it at level 3. There are no records of a Mirrored Soul Sorcerer who didn't use Counterspell to shut down a spell of 3rd level or lower automatically, and higher level spells with a Charisma check of 10 plus the spell's level. Later on, we'll discuss an ability that these sorcerers had that let them use Counterspell not just to shut down magic spells, but to reflect them. Banishment sends a creature to a harmless demiplane after they fail a charisma saving throw. Perhaps this harmless demiplane is where the mirrored souls were coming from, although once they entered our world, these souls were anything but harmless. Wall of Force creates a giant translucent wall that spells and attacks can't get through, like a giant pane of glass, though it would never be quite as large as the horrible thing in the Lakian Wastes. Let me in! Let me in! Generally speaking, the mirrored souls were able to blend into regular society, but in certain lights one might catch a glimpse of their crystalline skin. This gave them AC equal to 13 plus their constitution modifier, and an extra 1 HP for every level they took in the sorcerer class. Why make a tanky subclass for a d6 hit die class? 'Cause it's fun. That's why. An encounter with a mirrored soul sorcerer was unlucky enough already, but actually trying to hurt them was an even worse idea. Any creature that dealt damage to a mirrored soul sorcerer would have their luck shattered, giving them disadvantage on their next ability check, attack roll, or saving throw. Generally speaking, the mirrored soul sorcerers still tried to keep damage off with shield first, but if something ended up getting through, there would be punishment. And speaking of punishment, casting a spell at a mirrored soul sorcerer almost guaranteed you would end up on the end of some punishment. Reflected punishment allowed a mirrored soul sorcerer to spend a number of sorcery points equal to the level of the spell they were shutting down with something like counterspell or dispel magic. After they succeeded in dispelling that spell, they would absorb that spell and add it to their sorcerer's spell list until the end of their next long rest. They could also cast the spell once for free without spending any spell slots. For that free cast, it didn't actually matter whether or not the sorcerer was able to cast spells of that level. That meant that even at the 9th level, if a sorcerer was able to shut down a spell like Meteor Swarm of the 9th level, they'd be able to cast it. Although, if a sorcerer of the 6th level was fighting a creature with the spell Meteor Swarm, they were probably going to die from something else anyway. Eventually, the Mirrored Soul Sorcerers were not limited to magic and could absorb talent itself. At the 14th level, a Mirrored Soul Sorcerer could touch a creature as an action, forcing a Constitution saving throw. If the creature failed, the sorcerer was able to absorb one of the following skills: proficiency with a saving throw, proficiency with any weapon, proficiency with up to 3 skills, or 1 class or subclass feature from the 9th level or lower. Once absorbed, the sorcerer held on to these abilities until they finished a long rest, and could perform this action an amount of times per long rest equal to their charisma modifier. It wasn't uncommon for an adventuring party to lend some of their skills to a Mirrored Soul Sorcerer, though it did come at a cost. Having your talent drained is an exhausting endeavor, giving you 1 level of exhaustion for every talent taken from you. For party members, 1 level of exhaustion could go away as part of a long rest. It wasn't that big of a deal, but this also made absorbing talents a pretty effective way of taking down an enemy, as you could stack up to 5 levels of exhaustion on a creature at touch range with a d6 hit die. Might not be the best idea, actually. By the time they reached their full potential, the Mirrored Soul Sorcerers were warping reality itself. At level 18, the Mirrored Soul's parasitic connection allowed them to force a Constitution saving throw when they used Absorb Talent or Reflected Punishment, dealing 8d6 necrotic damage to the creature they were taking talent from if they were to fail. It doesn't feel very good to have part of your soul ripped away.
He's about to get his soul sucked.
They could only do this once per long rest, but thinking that you're going to be shooting a fireball and then ending up not dealing any damage and taking 8d6 necrotic damage was a fairly miserable thing for a caster to go through. These connections also lasted longer. Any talent absorbed from Absorbed Talent or spell absorbed from Reflected Punishment would stay with the Mirrored Soul Sorcerer for up to 7 days now. With enough prep time, an adventuring party could load up their Mirrored Soul Sorcerer to be good at just about everything. Although in Morier, no threat ever waited 7 days to spring. So how did the Mirrored Soul Sorcerer's abilities mix with the rest of Sorcerer? Well, if you'll remember earlier, Sorcerers cast spells. That's about it. And they have sorcery points that they can spend. Reflected Punishment is probably the best use of a Mirrored Soul Sorcerer's sorcery points. You could honestly just burn down all of your spell slots into sorcery points and absorb a bunch of spells and let your enemies decide what spells you're casting that day. That'd be kind of fun. Having extra spells as a Mirrored Soul Sorcerer allows you a little more wiggle room with your spell list to take more offensive spells like Fireball, Magic Missile, that kind of thing, or more defensive spells you could add on your already defensive spell list, like Dispel Magic or Blink. Probably the biggest interaction the subclass has with the rest of Sorcerer is Crystalline Skin, giving you better AC and a little bit more health. The real synergy doesn't start until we start multiclassing. Sorcerer is a class that multiclasses really well, since it's dependent on charisma. The capstone is kind of booty, so there's no real reason to stick to it for 20 levels. And since it's a full caster, it's a great way to raise up your multiclassing caster slots if you're playing something like a Paladin. I think my main goal with multiclassing a Mirrored Soul Sorcerer would be to find ways to raise up your counterspell checks. So going to Bard and getting Jack of all trades would let you add half of your proficiency bonus to any skill check you're not proficient with. You're not proficient with counterspell checks, so that would be at least +2 if you dipped 2 levels into Bard. Mixing with Abjuration Wizard would be a little multi-ability dependent mad, but you would be able to add your full proficiency bonus to counterspell and dispel magic checks at level 10, which would be total level 16. That's a pretty big dip and a pretty high level character though. Artificer could get it going a little bit faster at level 7 with Flash of Genius, letting you add your intelligence modifier to any skill check within 30 feet of you, an amount of times per day equal to your intelligence modifier, but that really depends on your intelligence modifier as well, so you would need high intelligence and high charisma. Hexblade Warlock would be the best gishing option if you want to mix swordplay in with your spells, since you would be able to use your charisma modifier for your weapon attacks, and then you could be a melee fighter with a d6 hit die. You could also use the Hexblade to form a coffee lock, which is something that Reddick really likes. It takes a bit of explanation, but basically you burn down Warlock slots on a short rest to turn into sorcery points, which you could use for more Reflected Punishment. Sorcerer Paladin is always a solid multi-class, but it's even better with Crystalline Skin giving you extra HP, so there's even less punishment for dipping to the D6 hit die class, and the Shattered Luck ability would mean you could get in close and mess up anyone who tries to hit you. With that in mind, this actually multi-classes pretty well with Barbarian with a 1-level dip. That's because Crystalline Skin would give you the unarmored defense a Barbarian would have with a +3 to their dexterity modifier, which Barbarians rarely get. And then you'd resist bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and everyone who hit you would get worse at their next ability check, attack roll, or saving throw. You could even learn a concentration-free spell like Jump. Jump is good. I like Jump, and Jump on a Barbarian who has massive strength, that's a big jump. Speaking of jump, why don't you jump over to my Patreon? That's where you can find the text version of all of these subclasses, as well as every character sheet from every episode of Building Character at the $5 tier, making it very easy for you to set up a one-shot and test these subclasses. If you join at the $2 tier, you can go to the Discord and talk to other people about these subclasses. The Discord has been blowing up lately because people are giving me an unreasonable amount of support on Patreon thanks to these videos, and thanks to all of you who have done that. At the $1 tier, you can vote in the poll for what subclass you want to see next. Scavenger Rangers are survivors of a harsh, irradiated wasteland that improvise weapons and tactics better than anyone else. Or you could vote for the School of Monsters Wizard, wizards who don't focus on a school of magic, but rather on all things fierce and frightening. If you can't join the Patreon, that's fine. You can still support the channel by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a nice comment. Nice comments help the algorithm even more. And be sure to come back next week for more from the Gilded Coast of Moria.